Basically, my journey with mushrooms has been a variety of things. I started taking macrodose mushrooms in very ceremonial settings when I started to use, be exposed to the space consciously, and that was massively life-changing. And then I started microdosing mushrooms around 6 years ago, and that's a whole other life-changing process because for me, it gave me this live neuroplasticity while I was in my life. So versus in a bigger macrodose of psychedelics, if you're doing it in a ceremonial setting, you might be in an eye mask and a blindfold. You're really going into the layers of your inner world and your inner landscape. And that's a beautiful thing.
Welcome to Modern Enlightenment, a sanctuary for your soul, where we'll go on a path of personal and spiritual development. I'm Austin Mao.
And I'm Chuchu Wang. We are your companions on this journey of self-discovery and spiritual connection.
Join us as we delve into the fusion of modern psychotherapy, neuroscience, psychospirituality, and shamanic plant sacrament ceremonies, exploring the transformative potential of psychedelics for the mind, body, and spirit.
Our mission is to guide you to a place of profound awareness where emotions can be felt.
Together, let's illuminate the way to a brighter, more enlightened existence.
Modern Enlightenment, where your journey to inner peace begins.
Wow, I'm so excited to be on this podcast with Allison Shaper, the founder and CEO of Super Mush, a co-founder of the nonprofit Microdosing Collective that is working on legislation for mushroom microdosing, and the host of the podcast Into the Multiverse. Thanks for joining us, Allison.
I'm so excited to meet you, and I'm really excited to be Zooming with you on Monday. A great start to my week. It's nice to see you.
So there's part of me that wants to create the intro for our audience of how you came to be Allison Shaper, this beacon of the functional mushroom space and microdosing, etc. But I wonder, when I looked at your social media in preparation for this, I was really impacted by something that I saw that you posted yesterday. It was, I think, a podcast episode you recorded with your mother talking about your journey with your father's unexpected passing a year and a half ago. And, there's this part of me that just really wants to dive right into that. And I wonder, maybe there's a way we can weave that. My consciousness story began when my father passed 8 years ago. And if I look back at how I handled that event in my life back then, I see how I would have handled that this time in my life, especially looking forward into, the inevitable future of my mother passing too. The kind of tools that I have now are very different than what I had before. And I'm curious for you, since you've been in the mushroom space for longer than a year and a half, how has your journey and the tools that you've learned to be with yourself, to be with an extraordinary event like that, how did that impact how you met yourself a year and a half ago? And where has that journey taken you since?
Yeah, it's an amazing question that I think about a lot. So I have thoughts on this topic. And I guess first and foremost, my dad is amazing, and his lack of physical presence from my life is extremely challenging and painful, especially because his death was unexpected. And I think, both diagnosis, terminal diagnosis and sudden death are challenging in their own unique ways. And it's been the most beautiful teacher in my life in other ways. And to say that psychedelics and mushrooms and the understanding of really fungi holistically is a part of that would be a massive understatement, because it's been a really big part of my processing of that experience. So for me personally, massive, and I can dive into more specifics on why, but what also feels really important to share is I was blessed enough, and I'm extremely grateful that I was able to introduce mushrooms to my parents before my dad passed away. And so my experience of his transition is so different, knowing that he felt pretty clear on where he was going and his connection to something larger than himself that was informed by mushrooms. And he was very religious growing up and had a strong connection to God, but there's a different visceral experience of God with mushrooms, and this, this unification experience of we are all one that he very much had. And my mom as well had a really profound experience with psychedelics before she passed away, which is the clip that before my dad passed away. which is a clip that you're referencing on Instagram. I recorded a podcast with my mom about the experience, and she spoke so beautifully and very vulnerably shared her path with psychedelics because I just wanted to have that conversation documented with her. We actually never intended to release it. And then I asked her if we could, and it's their most popular episode, and it's helped a lot of people that have had a very similar experience or have just been interested in exploring the potential of introducing their parents to psychedelics from a mindset that would otherwise not be open to it. So my mom is actually a way more powerful proponent for the
Mm,
psychedelic space than I am. And she never tried any substances before her 60s. Very similar to like a Michael Pollan situation, if you will. So, I mean, I guess back to your original question, mushrooms have given me a really beautiful connection to death. And obviously, I started this whole company and this whole kind of world that we're building with Super Mush, which is a functional mushroom brand, and passion for the psychedelic space through our media arm Into the Multiverse, which you mentioned. We have a podcast, we do a ton of events. And I was so passionate about the microdosing conversation and started to dive into understanding legal policy that I went to one of our mutual friends, Paul Austin, and Josh Capel, who's our lawyer, and a bunch of other amazing people, and started a whole nonprofit around it. So I was very passionate about that world. And then when my dad passed away, it gave a new layer of
mm,
meaning to all of it. My dad also was really impacted by the practice of microdosing, and his death was unexpected. And I have like this deeper sense of peace around it because of his experience of life being impacted by psychedelics, and me also seeing a new sense of urgency, I guess, to get this education to people that might benefit from using these practices out to more people, especially for grief. So not only was it impactful in my journey of experiencing my dad's passing, likely his experience of his own passing, but then also my mom's experience of life after that. It's so much so that I wrote this story about it because I talk about it so often. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, but it's called Mushrooms Eat Death for Breakfast. And obviously, a cute play on words name, but the intention of this story is really to paint a picture of how mushrooms have such a beautiful relationship with death and dying and the process of death, rebirth. They literally eat dead material from the earth, decompose it, and return it to the soil and regenerate it. And it's used then for new life. And what humans do in a lot of cases is we actually freeze bodies, we lock them up so that mushrooms can't eat them and interrupt this cycle of death. So there's more to that conversation, but it's been a topic that I'm really passionate about. So thanks for asking the question.
wow, it felt like I just went through a roller coaster of emotions, like hearing your share. At one point, I felt my own internal grief, never being able to be with my father again, and just imagining that as beautiful as death can be as a teacher, that there's still that for you. And simultaneously, like this level of inspiration that, where I had tingles in my body from hearing how much it's impacted you and on your mission too. And I'm really reminded of something Ram Dass had as a practice, that he often would go to hospices and purposely like engage with people who are dying. He found that to be a practice that contained a lot of beauty and a lot of spiritual importance for him to help usher people to that next place, right? And it sounds like what you learned through the experience, what you learned and what your parents learned through the experience is a clarification, right? Buddha says that the source of all fear is the fear of uncertainty, death being the greatest uncertainty. Who knows what's on the other side of death? Except that with these kind of tools, mushrooms being one of them, like we can develop a felt sense of that clarity, of that certainty, that death is not the end of who I am, right? It's just the end of this body or this incarnation. Does that land for you?
Yeah, it does. And I love that you brought up Ram Dass. Obviously, he has endless amazing quotes. We recently hosted a death dinner. I've been obviously very inspired by this topic. So we're creating,
Wow.
fun, light social
Yeah.
events like death dinners around it. And my boyfriend shared this quote from Ram Dass, and Ram Dass says, "Death is
Right.
like taking off a tight shoe." And I really like that because there's this fear that we've developed in our Western world, in some other cultures as well, but specifically in the West, we have a weird relationship with death. It's not talked about. And so I had this really strong polarity between like my relationship with my dad's passing and then kind of being put into a Western process of funeral and wakes and processing it with based on the way that I grew up. I'm from Missouri. So the way that they process death there is how you would expect people from Missouri to process death in the way that we do typically in the West. There's a very kind of sterile process around it and a lot of grief and a lot of sadness. And, you're celebrating someone's life in a way, but it's hard and challenging and viewed as a
Mm.
failure in a lot of ways. And what's been cool about the process of, writing this story about mushrooms eat death for breakfast and kind of speaking about it more is like reimagining a better way to die. Like, what if you could not view death as a failure? And on one hand, there's like the very real human emotions around it, but it's like the only thing that humans share in common, literally the only thing that we share in common. And it's one of the biggest things that can wake us up. And I like to think about these like kind of big macro examples or what are the big things that wake us up. And in my immediate world, like I've identified three that feel, and this is not my words or my teachings, just kind of like the things that have resonated most with me, but a near death experience where your physical body experiences, you almost die in whatever way that might look like, or you actually flatline and you come back to life and the kind of new lease on life that allows for. Two is someone that you love
Mm.
passes away suddenly. So it creates this physical void that's unignorable. And then three is ego death, right? Where people experience this most commonly through psychedelic experiences, but you can experience it through breath work or meditation or extended periods in nature. There's a lot of different ways to access this, but what each of those experiences do is wake up our consciousness in a way that really shakes up our existence and enables us to live differently. And the difference when someone you love passes away is it's permanent. There's no kind of like slipping back into old ways. There is slipping back into old patterns and you kind of like life returns, but it's a really powerful experience. I don't even remember what your original question was, but that's where I went
Yeah,
with
I'm
it.
reminded of Shakespeare's quote, right? Die before you die so that you may live fully. And there's this great
Mhm.
paradox that people are so afraid of dying, but that is what is actually the most freeing because that source of all fear, death being the greatest uncertainty, it percolates up. And the original question that I'm still curious about is, this happened a year and a half ago for you. When would you say you
Mm.
began your quote unquote consciousness journey?
Yeah, a long time ago, it feels like, but it's still ongoing. Like I'm very much a student of this space, including the reason why I love my podcast so much is I get to learn from all these brilliant people and convince them to sit on a couch with me for, an hour and a half. So I'm very much still a student of this space. But I would say when my brain started to change and I started to question everything about my life was around the time I was probably 23, 24. I had a very, you know, I was raised in a very conservative family, raised with the DARE program. So it's always really funny when my family from Missouri listens to my psychedelics
Totally.
podcast. But I had a really kind of like standard, very safe, beautiful childhood. And I was given kind of the grace to go on my own healing journey with like personal wellness issues I was dealing with. I was misdiagnosed with a lot
Mm.
of things when I was younger, as a lot of people are. Everything from like reflux medication to like surgeries I didn't need to have. Like I was given all these like really intense prescriptions for, at the end of the day, things that I just didn't have. So I had a pretty like failed experience with the Western medical system. And I think it has a time and a place, but it started to make me question outsourcing my healing. And I really became my own citizen doctor, specifically in grad school. I went and got my master's in accounting after being a bartender for 4 years in undergrad and did this like hardcore pivot into getting my master's and my CPA, which is really random given what I'm doing now for work. But I also went on this whole personal healing journey where I felt like I healed my physical body and started to take ownership of my physical vessel. And it also woke up my mind in a way to
Hmm.
outsourcing my healing to other people and really becoming my own healer. And during that time, I started to study. I was, very obsessed with self-improvement world. So I was just having my mind blown by, hundreds of hours of podcasts. And thank God for the medium of podcasts. I love it. So I'm glad that you're doing one. I think it's such a cool format, even though there's a bazillion of them now. It's still one of my most important teachers, and it which just exposed me to conversations that created the sense of neuroplasticity in my brain, a lot of learnings around psychedelics during that time. And then I started to explore with them in a conscious way. I had taken mushrooms in college and it was a beautiful experience and life changing. But understanding what they do to the brain and then putting something into your system is a totally different experience. And so, yeah, I just had my mind blown. And I actually don't know what my brain or my consciousness would look like without the use of psychedelics to unlayer a lot of those patterns. So they've been a major teacher for me. And I don't think they're for everyone, but I'm very grateful that I've been able to have access to them. So that was really like the start of my journey. And I think opened up a lot of synchronicity and beautiful humans into my world. And now a lot of what I think about is like how to keep my brain as neuroplastic as possible. And it's everything from like interesting conversations to community to, the list goes on and on. But that's kind of how
I'm
it
getting this
started.
like picture painted in my own mind of who Ali Schaefer was and who she became, culminating in what you just shared around your father's passing, in contrast with the Missouri, like Western way of meeting such a heavy amount of grief. And where that draws me is this curiosity of like, if you could go back in time and give Ali of 23 years old advice on how to meet this sort of forthcoming experience that you might have, like what would you say are the tools, the embodiments, the practices that you've done that has led you to be able to meet this extraordinary event in your life in the way that you have?
Yeah, I love the question. It's funny because I really do feel like I wouldn't have changed anything. So I wouldn't have in theory, told myself to do anything different. It's more because those mistakes that I've made have been very valuable to the learning process. So I almost think like giving myself a forewarning about things would have like softened my experience of life in a way where like going to the edges of extremity with relationships and social experiments and, you know, business decisions and like really creates lessons that are so informative of the way that you do life. So I really do believe in the divine timing of all of that. But a big guiding principle that I think was really important during that period that I think I could always value from learning earlier is not taking advice or wisdom with people that I wouldn't want to trade places with in that
Mm,
respective area. And it doesn't need to be every area, but I think one of the pitfalls I see around me a lot, and I notice myself when I do this, so I haven't like perfected this, but I am getting better and better at it, I think, as I get older, is not outsourcing my wisdom. There's things that you can learn from other people, but the idea is to become your own healer and your own guru, so to speak. And I think that so much of the time, I mean, myself included, when I give people advice, I'm just projecting from my own experience. And there's a lot of people that I shouldn't say people, I have seen myself go down a path where I'm taking wisdom from someone either because I want them to like me or they're super smart and very successful, but the reality is I really wouldn't want their life in the way that maybe they treat other people or other people treat them. Or so it's difficult to kind of parse through that. And it's really like a noting of what's a shiny object, and I'm in a world of like raising money and we have 100 investors. And I really landed at a place now, and it's been really informed by or solidified by my experience of my dad's death. It's like things I had within me that I was acting on, but a deeper clarity earlier around mission and intention, and realizing that like who you partner with is the ultimate, it will paint the picture of your life in so many ways. And so who you have around you in your inner circle, who's in the advisory board of your head,
advisory board of your
the
head.
people that are
Oh.
living, not, yeah, like I think about my head, like I have this visual where I think about my head like a board table. And I'm like, these are like 12 advisors. You can only really fit 12 at a time. And I picture them, some of them are people that are not in this dimension. One of them is definitely my dad. And who are you surrounding yourself with? Who are you getting advice from? Because you will slowly start to mimic that person's life. And the problem, I think, with a lot of these original, actually, I have another kind of story that I think might be interesting. And it made me think of your first question is I think a lot of my spiritual journey actually began at this moment. If I were to really think about it, the seeds were planted during the things I mentioned around college and my healing journey. But when I moved to New York City, I was working in corporate. I was in the process of quitting that job, and I decided to go on like a kind of an exploration through as many people as I could possibly meet in New York City and go to coffee with as many people as possible, write them all down, and just learn about life and humans and what made them happy. And it really dismantled this idea of like success and fame and money very early because I went in 1 year, I went on 365 coffee dates, not romantic, like business coffee dates, and just like connection coffee dates. And I wrote everyone down and I just asked them questions about what made them happy. And, I wanted to learn about how to be an entrepreneur at that time. But I ended up just kind of tracking that like pretty directly correlated that obviously, it's very obvious based on these people that money does not make you happy. And if you don't prioritize your community along the path to build whatever you're trying to build, that you end up on the exactly where you started, but just amplified and feeling very isolated. And so it really created this immediate priority in my world to like double down on community and people around me in a really profound way. So I do think that was a big part of my spiritual journey as well.
Well, I love so many words that you're using, particularly like this outsourcing your healing, right? And also outsourcing your wisdom. And, earlier when you talked about sort of the Western model, that's really kind of the crux of the Western model, isn't it? Like, let's get the quick fix. Let's find the pill that solves my pain for me, right? Or cures me. And again, kind of outsourcing like our well-being, our physical well-being, right? And it seems like as you have been going through your own journey, you've been finding advisors and creating the board of advisors in your brain. But ultimately, it seems like there's a clarity or a pathway towards greater and greater clarity. And the way that I receive this is it seems like you've gotten more clear on your values and are looking for that alignment of those values, which when they converge are your mission in life. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. And you can only really get clear on it when you find things that are not aligned
Totally.
and you start to unlayer that. Like, yeah. So I would say, my values, like experiences, like I would consider integrity one of my values. And I strive to be a person of deep integrity, but that's like come with kind of like skating next to, people and experiences that haven't been that way where I was like, oh, like I need to really like double down on this. So yeah, there's been so many experiences that I'm really grateful for that have been like kind of skirting with the edges of being in a not aligned place that have really forced me to look at things in a deeper way. And psychedelics do a lot of this for people. So I would say it's both just been like in life and through psychedelic experiences that I've been able to kind of get clear on that. And a lot of this like refinement of values and things I feel is so much easier if you're taking really good care of your physical vessel. And so I actually like stumbled into all this world through functional mushrooms, which we can talk about. But those were like the major unlock
Mm.
for my brain first. And I think it's really important to note because I think, using functional mushrooms has been a huge part of me feeling so amazing, even having like the conscious awareness to have these conversations with myself.
So here's a curiosity that I have. And this question is, I think for me, it's for our audience, right? Because I find the alignment with you in my own value system around not externalizing the healing agent. It's kind of encoded into our church's beliefs. But like what you shared about your parents, like doing mushrooms, finding that experience of unitary oneness or consciousness, and then mushrooms being supportive for you and your mother post your father's passing. How do you tie in this value of not outsourcing your healing or not outsourcing the wisdom to also consuming a substance like mushrooms that leads you into a deeper sense of beingness and peace?
Yeah, it's a great question because I do feel that like question obviously comes up a lot with people in the consciousness space. So I'll kind of answer it from my own personal lens, but right, that's the ultimate question of are you utilizing this kind of new the people I know that have had the most positive experiences with psychedelics are very much describing them to like they're tools to awaken your inner healer. And the problem is when we start to worship the substance itself and like keep returning to it on a way where either you're not learning the lessons from, what mushrooms or ayahuasca, which you guys are working with, are trying to tell you, is the message just gets louder and louder. And then, a lot of times we can become addicted to our own healing. I've definitely like witnessed that pattern in myself, and I feel a little allergic to it. So I try to notice it somewhat quickly. But I think, at least for me, like the way that I describe my relationships with mushrooms, I have relationships with all sorts of psychedelics, but mushrooms have been my greatest teacher. And my relationship with them is like, I really trust, I like to describe like, their wisdom that they show me. But it's really like, if I were to clarify that point, it's what mushrooms are like peeling back from me that I'm able to, teach and show myself. And obviously these medicines have been used for thousands and thousands of years and have been passed down through so many different lineages and cultures, and there's lots of different descriptions of why they're impactful and how. But I think I really trust the wisdom that comes through them because of that long-standing relationship. I actually believe mushrooms are the only medicine that have really
Mm.
stood the test of time in the way that feels, yeah, it's just a really powerful duration they've had.
I've heard you reference in different instances, like lessons that you've learned. And just now you referenced addicted to healing, right? By the way, I resonate. I've definitely brought my type A-ness as an entrepreneur to the aspect of healing in my life. And I also have an allergy to when I see that as well as a practice. So I'm curious, you know, we're all on our own journeys, and clearly you're still on yours and I'm still on mine. Over the span of your history of using mushrooms, how has your relationship with that practice and with mushrooms changed? How has that evolved? And what have you now incorporated into your practice with mushrooms, both functional and psychedelic, that you've learned over this time?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved. And I hope it continues to evolve, till I die. I hope it continues to evolve and I keep auditing it. I love kind of self auditing my life and looking at things. I love the process of kind of cleansing, both like spiritually and like physically. And so I'm always looking at that. And I love that. So I love this question. Basically, my journey with mushrooms has been a variety of things. I started taking macrodose mushrooms in very ceremonial settings when I started to use, be exposed to this space consciously. And that was massively life changing. And then I started microdosing mushrooms around 6 years ago. And that's a whole other life changing process because it gives you, and I'm sure you talked to Paul about this on the podcast, or you might have talked to about microdosing elsewhere, and everyone has a different, beautiful, colorful description of what it does for their life. But for me, it gave me this live neuroplasticity while I was in my life. So versus in a bigger macrodose of psychedelics, if you're doing it in a ceremonial setting, you might be in an eye mask and a blindfold. You're really going into the layers of your inner world and your inner landscape. And that's a beautiful thing. And you definitely shouldn't drive a car
Definitely not.
when you're in
Or
that
call an
space.
Uber.
Or call an Uber. Yeah, like nothing. You should just be still or be in nature. That's not necessarily fair. But the point is, it's not something you would take on a day-to-day basis. But microdosing is so powerful for me is that it's a subtle neuroplasticity, sub-hallucinogenic. I'm not experiencing any hallucinogenic effects. And it's been massive for not only my creativity and my workflow and my focus, but also it's increased my capacity to enjoy life. And I feel like I'm able to move through the world in a way that doesn't allow things to kind of stick to me as much. So I have this like visual of my body with like almost like honey or like molasses on it. So microdosing has helped remove that stickiness. So if something happens, it doesn't
Mm.
stick as much. So like the molasses is not as sticky somehow. And so you're able to move through things quicker where problems that would kind of get me hung up or interactions that might be challenging would stick with me for days. It kind of shortens the time duration. It's not about not feeling them. It's actually just about feeling them quicker and deeper in my experience. And so microdosing has been a very important practice, hence why we decided to, really work towards the legal advocacy of it and make sure that it's included in the policy conversation so that people can have access to this practice. So huge fan of microdosing. And then as far as the functional mushroom world goes, like I said, this was my entry point into the space. If the whole world's brain was on lion's mane, we would have an amazing uptick in consciousness on the planet because of what lion's mane and other functional mushrooms like cordyceps and turkey tail and reishi all do to your system. They're amazing medicine. And they've been around again for thousands of years. They're having this wake up moment in our Western world. But when you take high doses and functional doses of functional mushrooms, so non psychedelic mushrooms, they're incredible for re regulating your body, your immune system, your nervous system. And it's what led this inspiration for us to start Super Mush and kind of package the goodness of functional mushrooms and make them really fun and accessible. So I take functional mushrooms every day. Don't really take any other supplements. I kind of go through different phases of it, but I love functional mushrooms and I love microdosing.
I love that. Like everything you just said speaks to the versatility of mushrooms, right? And as you shared, you think it's the medicine that withstood the longest test of time. I mean, there's even the anthropological theory that the evolution from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens came from our ancestors eating psychedelic mushrooms and maybe functional mushrooms, right? The obelisk in 2001: A
Yep.
Space Odyssey was actually a big mushroom. And it sounds like there's this thread of mushrooms being a deep part of your own healing, not just spiritually and psychologically, but physically, and as well as this mission that you're on to like
Definitely.
share that thread with the rest of the world. Like, hey, look at this thing that does so much good in so many different ways. There's the psychedelic aspect, and there's the microdosing and macrodosing as part of that. But there's also just the physical well-being and it seems like performance enhancement from non-psychedelic mushrooms, right?
Yeah, I love talking about this, and a lot of what we lead with when we talk to partners or investors or anyone that we're working with for Super Mush is like, okay, why is this important versus like just like what is the product and what does it do for you? It's like, okay, why is it important? The problem is that so many of us, especially in the West, specifically in America, as that's our focus market for now, is that our brains and our bodies are so out of balance. And so this idea of homeostasis or alignment with our circadian rhythm or connection to nature, we're so disconnected from that. And a large part of it is the substances that we're consuming, both in the pharmaceutical system and recreationally, but like specifically to speak to pharmaceuticals, most pharmaceuticals keep people in their head. And there's like, a very detailed, long-winded, like actual biological impact of these medications. But what's happening is that they're creating rifts in our brain chemistry. And it's very impossible to operate from flow state, feel your emotions, especially with things like SSRIs that keep you in an emotionally flat space because of how they operate on serotonin. And ADHD medications are really heavily prescribed, when people can't focus. And there's all of these medications that have kind of come into the mainstream. ADHD medication is a few molecules off from methamphetamine. It's essentially speed as a pharmaceutical drug, and there's a lot of nuance there. But the point is, like, that's the brain state that a lot of people are in. It's both because they prescribe these things because they have mental health issues that they're struggling with, and then also those things can create mental health issues at the same time. So people are often coming to
Mm.
mushrooms from that place of, hey, I've tried everything else and I want something that is different. So I have a lot of people that come to me for advice on microdosing. And they're like, I need to get off of these pharmaceuticals, or my brain just is not, I don't feel like I'm here and I'm online. So I'm excited about that and that people are looking to these natural medicines. And the other thing is people are also looking to functional mushrooms as well for support and getting, their brain and their body back into balance. What happens when you take a high dose of lion's mane is amazing for neuroplasticity and memory and REM sleep. And the list goes on and on. So yeah, the state of where our brains are at currently is not great. Mental health is the worst it's ever been, but I'm really optimistic because we have access to all of these amazing tools in nature that can very much put us back into balance.
I love that you use the word medicine to describe mushrooms. And for us in the industry, I mean, that's very common. But most people who are not in this 10% of people that have used this in a therapeutic or a ceremonial environment refer to it as drugs, right? And something that you're speaking to is the almost universality of mushrooms in that it crisscrosses the mind, body, and spirit, right? When I look at your content, you speak very much about spirituality, particularly how you approached your father's passing. And simultaneously, there's all these different modalities that you're speaking to now, right? Microdosing psychedelics, macrodosing, functional mushrooms, etc. And they all sort of crisscross the psychological, the physical body, the spiritual. So where do you see this field going? Like, can you deep in this world, right? Can you paint a picture for 10 years from now on what, given that Super Mush and you are very ahead of the curve, and I think really anybody operating at the legal psychedelic level is very ahead of the curve right now, right? FDA has deemed it a breakthrough therapy. MDMA is set to be hopefully legalized August 11th, right? Expectation is psilocybin next year or the year after. So as this becomes more mainstream, like where do you see mushrooms going, both at the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual level?
Yeah. On one hand, my answer is like, I have no idea. But in the other idea, I think I do have an idea, or at least I have a hope of where I
Mm.
would love to see things at in 10 years based on all the signals and all the work that's being done and the amazing entrepreneurs that are in the space and the amazing wisdom that's in the space because, even as I say that, like, these medicines have been such a deep part of culture for so long in indigenous cultures, and we are westernizing them right now. We do, I very much believe we should have access to them and we need them, but there's like a reverence, and people use the words indigenous reciprocity, and that's very important as we're bringing these medicines to the mainstream. It's a different conversation when you're talking about synthetics that are things that we've developed in more recent years in the world. But I hope that those two worlds stay very closely together on the boards of each other's companies, figuratively and literally, or at least in each other's heads. What I would love on a very like 3D level with microdosing specifically, I would love, our goal is to introduce a bill in the California legislature next year with microdosing collective. Would love to see microdosing legalized as a wellness supplement with some sort of interesting guardrails around it that feels appropriate based on where policy is at in California in 2025. And then I would love to see that slowly rolled out to the rest of the country after that, that pilot program and that framework has worked. I'd love to see more amazing clinical trials successful on microdosing specifically. Most of the research in that space is anecdotal. We've kind of crossed a threshold where we realize that doesn't make sense because of, there's been some studies that have proven it to be placebo or no better than the placebo. Those studies had some design flaws that I'm excited will be, definitely redone in the next 10 years, if not much, much quicker than that. So that's where I see microdosing specifically. As far as macrodosing and policy and where that rollout is happening, and there's bills being introduced all across the country. We have a policy committee meeting within Microdosing Collective almost every week where all the lawyers share updates from all across the country, what bills are being introduced, which ones we're excited about, which ones are not going to go through. Some surprising states are introducing research bills, but definitely the world has caught on to it. Unfortunately, California did veto again the therapeutics bill that Scott Wiener proposed. That was a very narrow therapeutics bill this year in California. So it's not a linear path. It's a little surprising because it's California, but there's a lot of politics still at play. But overall, I see this convergence of culture and government kind of coming together. And previously, culture and government are kind of moving separately. And I think there's a lot of people that see the need to close the gap between those two worlds and also bring these medicines to people that work within government as well. A lot of the people, we went to the Capitol around 2 months ago and educating people about microdosing specifically, but psychedelics, as a whole. And so many people that work within the California and in Sacramento, legislative system were talking to us about the problems that either they or their significant others or loved ones are experiencing with their mental health. And we're curious about how to get access to these tools because they were inspired about how they could help them. So it's not like an us versus them thing. Everyone really wants the same thing. It's just an education issue. And I see like a mass rollout of educators that are coming into the space, people from all different levels of expertise. You have like new people that have massive platforms and a microphone, celebrities coming out to talk about the space. But I very much see it as like, surround the system from all sides. And my friend gave me this beautiful quote that I talk about all the time. It's like, we're all just pressing acupuncture points across the planet. So I think everyone's continuing to press their acupuncture point, and momentum is the key thing here. So I think we have so much momentum right now. There's obviously some very, significant setbacks that will continue to happen, and there'll be things that will look like setbacks, but I very much believe that the trend is upward, and I'm very optimistic about it. So a little bit of a soft answer, but I hope psychedelics are legalized worldwide in 10 years.
Use this word of the convergence of culture and government. I love that phrasing. And it feels like a lesson learned from the 50s and 60s, where mushrooms was counter-culture, counter-government, right? And really got associated with the anti-Vietnam conflict. One of the reasons why it was made illegal by Nixon in the first place. And that had a backlash, right? And we kind of entered the dark ages of psychedelics from the 60s to the 2010s, where it started getting reinvigorated, and now we're in this new psychedelic revolution, and it's called. What do you think are the potentials for setback now? What do you think that we should be more careful about, more considerate of, as we seek to legalize, make this more accessible, promote it out, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So many things, two immediate things that come to mind. One is that if you look at the rates of festivals that have drug education tents and the ability to safely test your substances, the rate of overdose plummets. And so most of the issues that come along with drugs are from the fact that they're illegal. It's from dosing and actually not taking the substance that you think you're taking, or not having really any education about everything from set and setting to when to take it, how to take it, et cetera. It doesn't matter if you're altering your consciousness for recreational or for, intentional ceremonial use. Like, the education is key. That's something that we need more of. And it's definitely a pitfall of psychedelics becoming more mainstream, because not everyone has access to that education. And then the second thing is, like, specifically with the underground market, it's exploding, as psychedelics become more mainstream and the zeitgeist and the culture is catching on, and all the Silicon Valley CEOs are coming out about their use of microdosing and psychedelics, which is not a new thing. Like, that was very, from companies that were born in the 60s, but it's becoming very trendy. And I live in Venice. I live in the centerfold of all of these things out in LA and California. And microdosing and drinking lion's mane or coffee is very trendy and
Yeah.
normalized here. And as that happens, the underground products that scale are not always making these products in integrity. I know some amazing companies that are doing, that are having incredible high efficacious products, but Double Blind just did a study that they released on auditing underground brands, and found that many of them don't even contain, specifically with this was mushroom chocolates, don't even contain psilocybin, and we're containing other forms of synthetics. And so that's not good. I think that we need to, really put an end and stop that, because it's incredibly dangerous cross contamination. We need a way to safely enable people to know what's in their products and give them quality, both supplements and, if you're microdosing psilocybin because you improve your consciousness, you should be able to have access to a safe product.
Yeah, education is so critically important. And what you're speaking to is also the standard of care that people should have, which includes the actual product that they're consuming, right? And,
Yeah.
Something that is really a big value set of mine is for our listeners to know that mushrooms or psychedelics is not a panacea either. It's not like you have a death in the family, you take the mushrooms, and then suddenly you are Buddha and in full peace with this thing. Like, it takes work. It's an accelerant, right? And it's an
Yeah.
accelerant towards meeting yourself more, meeting your emotions, and instead of suppressing them, right? And so, how do we spread this education more? How do we guard against the actors that are creating products that are not of quality? What would your prescription for the field as it's growing be?
I'm biased because I definitely think people should get involved with Microdosing Collective and what we're up to, because it's exactly what we're trying to do. I think we need as many people involved in the legalization push as possible. And it's like a win for everyone to bring these above ground in a way that's conscious and smart, and is working in parallel with the macrodosing at service center legalization model that we're looking at and that's happening across the country. And then as far as education, there's amazing companies out there that are doing such cool work. And I hope those companies continue to scale and that you see more of them. Third Wave is obviously an amazing research site. It's like why I went to Paul, because he's taught millions of people how to microdose and use psychedelics in a way that's safe, and now training coaches. Double Blind is an amazing, very modern, very sexy branded, incredible magazine that's educating people about psychedelics, the history, the current use, the legalization, the nuances, all the things. I mean, there's endless other sites. Obviously, all the work that companies have been doing for decades, like MAPS, is really inspiring and exciting. And I think it's happening. So I just think more attention needs to be going to the space. So I would say my call to action is, if you are listening to this and you feel passionate about involving yourself in some way, obviously you can reach out to us at Microdosing Collective and see if we're always looking for amazing humans to come in and help us move it forward. But if you feel inspired about getting involved in mushroom space at all, there's so many cool companies to reach out and collaborate with. And I hope everyone continues to support each other, because it really, it's the mycelium network. It rises together and works together. And I think there's a way to build companies like the mycelium network.
Thank you for providing all of those resources. Just even naming these organizations is important, because there's a lot of information out there, right? And one of the things that our world suffers from right now is information overload. No one really knows where to go for the accurate information. And fortunately, there's a lot of rigorous science around the value of both functional and psychedelic mushrooms. And there's a lot of resources out there now that are great. Well, this whole thread, beginning with the impact the mushrooms has had on your life and meeting, arguably one of the greatest challenges that one can face in their own lives, the death of a parent, right? To your advocacy work and your thoughts on how this extraordinary and versatile medicine is going to scale. It feels like the clarity that you've been developing in connection with mushrooms is growing more and more in yourself. And I, for one, feel grateful that a business leader like you is doing the inner work, not outsourcing your wisdom and your own healing, so that you can represent this space with integrity that I see you doing with it. So first, thank you for this story, for this thread, for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful reflection. I love what I get to do every day. I shared this before we started recording, but I get to talk about mushrooms for a living. So I am very excited and grateful to have come on the show. But thanks for having me.
So if people want to get involved in Microdosing Collective, to learn more about Super Mush or listen to Into the Multiverse, how can they find you?
I'm on Instagram a lot, and my personal handle is Allison Shaper. I'm sure you'll link it in the show notes. Everything I do is linked underneath of my personal Instagram, but Super Mush is our brand and our company. We are doing some really cool collaborations with artists and festivals, and just have some really fun things planned for this year and beyond. And that's supermush.com, or it's Supermush on Instagram. And then Into the Multiverse is our podcast. You can find it everywhere podcasts are streamed. And it's Into the Multiverse, spelled how it sounds. And then Microdosing Collective is microdosingcollective.org. You can reach out directly on there to get involved with us, or DM us on Instagram. You can find me pretty easily on the internet. So DM me on Instagram. If you have any thoughts or cool companies that might be interested in collabing, we're always open to beautiful people and cool things we can do together.
Thank you again for being on the show, and really excited to keep developing this friendship that we have.
Likewise. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Modern Enlightenment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to check out our website, subscribe to our online community, and check out our social media links in the show notes for more resources and updates.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay connected with our upcoming episodes, where we continue to explore the intersection of modern science and spiritual wisdom. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep shining your light.